Hi everybody, my name is Elizabeth and I'm a librarian here at the LSC Tomball Community Library. Welcome back to Baking is Baking, which is the series where we're not always baking anything, but where we are always talking about food. Whenever people ask me what my favorite type of cuisine is, it always feels like I'm picking a favorite child. But I have to admit that Japanese food always ends up somewhere near the top of the list. But if you're somebody who doesn't eat meat, enjoying Japanese food can be pretty hard because meat and seafood in particular feature pretty heavily in the cuisine. Dishes like sushi, katsudon, and ramen, which are super iconic, are not always vegetarian, and so you can feel like you're missing out on some of the more noteworthy aspects of Japanese cuisine if you don't eat meat. But Japan actually has a long history of not just vegetarian, but vegan cuisine. It's known as shojin-ryori, or devotional cuisine, and comes out of the Zen Buddhist temples of Japan. It hasn't been as heavily exported stateside as the stuff you're likely to find in your local Japanese restaurant, but it is seeing something of a resurgence in Japan, particularly as more and more people go vegan, and is absolutely fascinating and delicious to cap it all off. So join me today as we celebrate Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month by looking at one of the most interesting, intentionally vegan cuisines in the world, shojin-ryori, and make a shojin-ryori dish here together. So let's get started. Although Buddhist monks in many Buddhist-majority countries have their own unique cuisine that they make and serve within their temples, the shojin-ryori that is consumed in Japan specifically rose out of the Zen Buddhist tradition. Zen is a type of Mahayana Buddhism. Mahayana Buddhism is the most widely practiced type of Buddhism in the world, encompassing a little over half of all Buddhist practitioners, and is the most heavily practiced type of Buddhism in East Asia. Zen in particular arose when Mahayana Buddhism mingled with the Taoism that was already being practiced in China during the Tang Dynasty, sometime around the 5th century CE. What resulted is a type of Buddhism that is heavily focused on meditation. In fact, Zen is the Japanese pronunciation of the Chinese word chan, which is itself the Chinese pronunciation of the Sanskrit word dhyana, which means meditation. Buddhism was introduced to Japan via Chinese and Korean Buddhists around the 8th century CE, and Zen in particular began to be practiced around the 12th century CE when the monk Nonin opened the first Zen school in Japan, known as the Daruma school. There are a number of Zen schools in Japan, and they all have slightly different beliefs and practices, and Zen is not the only type of Buddhism that is practiced in Japan. But it is the one that is most closely associated with shojin-ryori, and this is because of a few distinct aspects of Zen philosophy. Unlike religions like Christianity, Buddhism has no singular sacred text. Instead, it has a variety of sacred texts in a number of different canons that followers of different traditions read and use differently. While Zen Buddhists do interact with these texts, which are known as sutras, their primary focus is on direct spiritual practice. Because of this, you can practice Zen Buddhism as you go about your everyday life. So you can see how something like cooking could be just as much of a spiritual practice as more traditional religious activities like meditation, chanting sutras, or other rituals that Zen Buddhists perform. So how do you make food Buddhist? If you've ordered Buddha's Delight from your local Chinese place like I have, then your gut reaction might be to say, make it vegetarian. But that isn't always the case. In fact, many lay Buddhists are not vegetarians, or are only vegetarian on certain holy days. Even some Buddhist monks aren't vegetarians, particularly if they follow Tibetan Buddhism. However, for the shojin-ryori that is coming out of the Zen Buddhist tradition of Japan, vegetarianism is important for a couple of reasons. The first is Buddha nature, which is one of the most important concepts in Zen Buddhism. Essentially, it states that all living creatures are capable of achieving enlightenment, like the Buddha, and this includes animals in addition to people. The second would be ahimsa, Ahimsa is one of the 5 precepts of Buddhism, which function kind of similarly to the 10 Commandments in Christianity. It literally means non-violence, and it prohibits Buddhists from killing. So you can see if you are wanting to cook by Buddhist principles, making sure your food is vegetarian is a good first step. I say first step because shojin-ryori is about a lot more than just ensuring that your food doesn't have meat in it. Because these dishes are meant to be consumed as part of a spiritual practice, they do a lot of other interesting things as well. Meditation and clarity of mind are of particular importance to Zen Buddhists, so often they'll avoid using ingredients that have particularly strong flavors, like onions and garlic. In fact, onions and garlic are part of a category including other things like Chinese chives, shallots, and asafoetida, which is an herb that kind of functions like MSG, as part of the 5 acrid and strong-smelling vegetables, which are all banned under shojin-ryori principles. In fact, shojin-ryori avoids strong flavors altogether. Seasoning is usually very minimal, instead focusing on drawing out the natural flavor of the ingredients they use, which involves using vegetables and fruits at the very peak of their freshness and cooking them as little as possible to maintain their natural flavors and textures. Like other aspects of Zen Buddhist practice, shojin-ryori is heavily focused on balance, and they do this by appealing to a few rules while they're cooking. One is the 5 colors. Ideally, a complete shojin-ryori meal should feature ingredients that cover the colors yellow, red, black, white, and green. They also attempt to use all of the 5 flavors, which are sweet, salty, sour, bitter, and umami or savory. Eating a shojin-ryori meal should be a feast for all the senses, so texture, sound, smell, and sight will be taken into account in addition to just the taste of your food. Eating your meal should be an experience similar to meditation, so you should be able to fully savor the food that you're eating as well as to appreciate the natural world that brought those ingredients to you. Because of this, many shojin-ryori kitchens are heavily opposed to waste. So things like carrot tops and vegetable peels, or even the water used to wash your vegetables, will be saved to make broths and other dishes later. Traditional shojin-ryori meals would be served in multiple courses in a Zen temple or monastery. You can still visit Zen temples in Japan and be served shojin-ryori meals there, but it's become trendy enough that there are also private shojin-ryori restaurants that you can go to as well. I don't have the time or money to fly to Japan to try this myself right now, so instead we are going to be making a traditional shojin-ryori dish here together, udon with sesame. Before we get started though, we're going to go through some of the ingredients that you might not be familiar with. The first and probably the most important ingredient that you need to familiarize yourself with is dashi. Dashi is a family of stocks used frequently in Japanese cooking, and it is the foundation of many of the most iconic Japanese foods, including miso soup. It is typically made by boiling kombu, which is dried kelp, with bonito flakes, which is dried fish. But the kombu-only variety is also frequently used and is what this recipe calls for since it is vegetarian. I happen to already have some on hand because I use it pretty frequently at home, but you can really easily make it yourself or buy it in a powder and use that. Another you might not be familiar with is mirin. Mirin is a kind of sweetened sake or rice wine that is used for cooking. It is delicious and super versatile, so I would really recommend you buy some. You'll use it all the time, and you can really easily find it in the Asian food section of your local grocery store. To make shojin-ryori udon with sesame, you will need 4 tablespoons of toasted and ground sesame seeds, 60 grams of daikon radish, 2 packages of dried udon noodles, a handful of shredded seaweed, 100 milliliters of konbu dashi, 2 tablespoons of soy sauce, and 2 tablespoons of mirin. To start, we need to grind our sesame seeds. The sesame seeds I bought have already been toasted, so we don't need to do any more toasting. And if you don't have a mortar and pestle handy, I know I don't, just pop your sesame seeds into a food processor and pulse until smooth. Once they're nice and smooth, go ahead and set them aside. Next, we're going to prep our daikon. We only need a very small amount for our finished dish, and shojin-ryori is very serious about avoiding food waste. With that in mind, I would recommend cutting a small piece of your daikon and weighing it to see if it meets the 60 grams required for the recipe. Once you've got roughly enough, peel it and grate it into a bowl. Any grater will work fine, but I'm going to use my microplane. Once you've got your daikon grated, transfer it to a sieve so that it can drain out any excess liquid. To make our udon sauce, combine your dashi, soy sauce, and mirin together in a saucepan and bring it to a boil. We don't want the sauce to reduce, so once you've got it boiling, go ahead and remove it from the heat and set aside. Now to cooking our udon. Boil a pot of water and add your noodles. Cook according to package directions or until your noodles are al dente. Once cooked, drain and rinse with cold water to stop the cooking process and ensure that your noodles are still nice and springy. Now we can serve. Separate your cooked udon between bowls and top with your ground sesame, grated daikon, and shredded seaweed. Pour your udon sauce on top, mix, and enjoy. If this got you hungry to learn a little bit more about shojin-ryori, I've got just the thing. This is a pretty niche concept that we don't have a lot about here in our collection, but that doesn't mean that you have nowhere to go because of our interlibrary loan service. Interlibrary loan allows you to pull materials from other libraries even if we don't have it here in our collection, which is actually how I got a hold of the cookbook that I used for this episode, Shojin-ryori, The Art of Japanese Vegetarian Cuisine by Danny Chu. If you've never used it before, check out the ILL FAQ on our website, or you can watch the tutorial that I made for it, which I'll link down in the description. Thank you for watching this episode of Baking is Making. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter so that you never miss a future Baking is Making or any of our other great online programs. This was an absolute delight to do. I've always wanted to try this, so this was really a great pleasure. I hope you are all having a fantastic Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and I really encourage you to check out our other programming for this because it's just such an exciting time and a really great time to kind of focus and uplift the voices of our Asian and Asian American community members. Thank you again, and I will see you next time. Bye!